Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the CEO of Star Alliance, Mr. Jeffrey Goh.
Thank you to GBTA and thank you to PATA for having me here this afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I won't spend too much time introducing myself. I guess we'll just get on to the little 10 minutes that I have today. Much has already been said and written about the darkest and deepest crisis that the aviation industry has had to confront over the last 2 to 3 years. So let me not rehearse much of that here. But suffice it to say that the industry has yet again proved its resilience. As much as no one could have predicted the COVID-19 crisis and its consequences way beyond the aviation industry, few expected the remarkable pace with which the industry is now recovering, and it is recovering well by any measure, given what we have witnessed in the recent months. So I thought I'll share with you before I go into more substantive comments on some of the trends that we've been seeing. Oh, it's up there already. Some of the trends that we've been seeing as the industry recovers. We're looking at about 84% in comparison to 2019 levels in terms of capacity today. And that's not likely to change as we close out 2022. That's a remarkable return from where we were just less than 3 years ago. And you will note that on the top of the screen here, haven't got the note up there, the global recovery at 84% of 2019 excludes China. And if you now build in the capacity that China would have brought in from 2019, we would have exceeded 2019 levels in November 2022, just 3 years or so, or just under 3 years from when the crisis first started. Of course, there are probably pockets in different parts of the world and geographies today where the 2019 levels in capacity measures has already been exceeded. And if you look at the graph, from where we were in the depths of the crisis, we're about twice from where we were. That's an incredible return given where we were before. If we now look at Asia Pacific, again excluding China, we are at about 67%. Of course, this is slightly below the global recovery pace, given that most of Asia was slow in opening up their borders. But again, it is poignant to make that this excludes China. And if you were to now factor in the 2019 numbers of China, we will probably be hitting close to 100% of 2019 levels. And here's some statistics on international passenger traffic, passenger numbers, to and from Asia Pacific, and yet again excluding China, at 54%. Remarkable from where we were just under 3 years ago in November 2020. I thought this would be interesting to the audience here this afternoon, particularly for travel into and out of Asia Pacific, how the trends have changed in just under 3 years from 2019 to 2022 today in terms of the most popular city pairs in Asia Pacific or into Asia Pacific. I circled there were 3 in 2019 that are now making its way this year in 2022. The remaining 7, most of which involves Hong Kong and Tokyo, they do not figure in 2022. Of course, the simple explanation to that is Hong Kong and China have been slow in opening up. But it is important, I guess, to note the corresponding recovery in terms of border restrictions being removed. Similarly, you see a picture here in terms of destinations that are being served from the top airports in Asia Pacific. On average, we are close to about 80% of 2019 levels. And that's quite a remarkable, again, return. And for some airports, particularly those that have a significant domestic market, like Japan, Haneda is almost close to 100% of where they were in 2019, in the middle of the chart. So I thought I'll share with you some of these trends, given what this conference is about in terms of looking at the recovery for travel and aviation. Notwithstanding these positive emerging trends, early trends, I will say, we must, of course, look ahead to how we will build back better and connect the world again. But as we do so, I think the industry must be cognizant of some of the structural headwinds that it will need to adjust to. And by structural headwinds, I don't mean the age-old problem of geopolitical conflicts, geopolitical tensions that we see today, for example, between Russia and Ukraine. And I also don't mean the economic volatilities of rising fuel prices, price inflation, adjustments in market segmentations. By structural headwinds, there are three that the aviation industry is being confronted with today, one of which I will come to very shortly, which the panel earlier talked about in terms of environmental sustainability. But there are two others that the aviation industry is focused on in terms of what the structural headwinds look like going forward. One, cybersecurity. Data breaches at airlines and much elsewhere have become a serious concern. British Airways, EasyJet, AirAsia recently, American Airlines have all made it to the headlines. And why do I say this as an important structural headwind for the industry? Because while these concern and affect personal data and the protection of privacy, the broader reality of the matter is the risk that these cybersecurity threats pose to safety of operations. So many of the aeroplanes in the air today that transport millions of passengers, many of us here this afternoon, are flown by wire. The automated nature of these systems and the dependency of operations on these systems make them particularly vulnerable to unwarranted intrusions. So the stakes are high, and deeper industry collaboration is what we're asking for so that we become more intelligently prepared against these threats. Second, digitalization and infrastructure investments. Talents were lost, regrettably, during the COVID crisis. Significant amount of talents were lost. Many will never return to the industry that they have come to regard as unattractive. The industry, as a consequence, will need to address this shortfall through significant capital expenditure and investments in new processes, in new systems, and greater automation. Greater adoption of self-check-in facilities, for example, greater deployment and adoption of biometrics solutions at airports, for instance. Of course, no automation can remove bags from the aircraft, but it will address some of the challenges that we have faced in terms of the loss of talents in the industry, all of which to ensure safe and seamless customer experience. So that's two, cybersecurity threats and infrastructural investments. The third, and forgive me if I were to repeat some of the remarks made by the panel earlier, is environmental sustainability. It used to be that for an airline, there were three stakeholders: the customers, the employees, and the shareholders. Now we have the fourth, and that's the environment. Commercial aviation may be a century old, but it is now having to earn its license, its right to continue flying. But the equation of responsibilities for addressing this important issue can be better balanced, at least from the point of view of the airline industry. Aviation and environmental sustainability is not and cannot be the sole concern of airlines. If we were serious in achieving the ambitious target of net zero emissions by 2050 for the industry, this is a matter for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. Government agencies, fuel suppliers, aircraft manufacturers, engine manufacturers, airports, all have an integral part to play in the decarbonization efforts of the industry. But dare I say that it is the genuine reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that will ensure sustainable and responsible air travel going forward. Simply removing plastics from on board an aircraft is not going to be sufficient, and that has become clear in many parts of the world. By the same token, there will need to be better accountability to measure the effective progress of these reductions, objectively and transparently. Thankfully, we have exciting technologies that are looking to build calculators and ways in which, or tools and ways in which we can measure how emissions is being reduced. The major challenge for the industry at this time, and I think the panel talked about it earlier on, is the availability and the cost of sustainable aviation fuels. I call these gold dust, because every airline is chasing this in order to have its green credentials. But production is very limited at this time. On average, we are lifting about the aviation industry approximately 1% of sustainable aviation fuels relative to the volume of jet fuel that is carried annually. And we have a very ambitious target of net zero emissions by 2050. That's 28 years away. But in the same breath, however, let's not overlook that aviation emits, or international aviation at least, emits 2 to 3% of total global emissions. And we must certainly not overlook the significant steps that have been taken by the industry, investments that have been made by the industry in terms of reducing emissions. From significant investments in more efficient aircraft and engines to reducing weight on board an aircraft. There are very few airlines today where you can find in-flight magazines anymore. There are very few airlines today in which you find, at least in the back section of the aircraft, printed menus. All are small efforts, small steps to try to reduce fuel burn and therefore emissions. But I think we should also be excited by what technology can deliver to make air travel more sustainable as we go forward. We talked about sustainable aviation fuels, absolutely. That is the one item that will make the most impact in terms of reducing emissions by the aviation industry. Although it may be some years away, progress is advanced in looking at hydrogen aircraft and electric-powered aircraft. But it's still some way away in terms of such aircraft being able to fly long distances. But we may well see this in a very short period of time, being able to serve the feeder traffic between cities and a major hub. Carbon capture technology is already available. But perhaps the more exciting, at least for me, the more exciting innovation will be the ability to convert the captured carbon into liquid energy, and to do so in scale. And that is beginning to happen. And my last point about environmental sustainability, and certainly in the case of sustainable aviation fuels, is we must be better coordinated internationally in terms of the standards for the use of SAF, in terms of the recognition of SAF and the feedstock, and avoid the politicization of climate change and the usage of SAF. As we saw with the politicization in recognizing COVID vaccines in the middle of the COVID crisis. That will set us back in terms of meeting our net zero emissions target by 2050. I have barely scratched the surface here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, but suffice it to say that to address the challenge, to address environmental sustainability for the industry, it is both a challenge as well as an opportunity, as I referred to some of the innovative technologies that are beginning to emerge in addressing the challenge of greenhouse gas emissions. So in the little time that I have, ladies and gentlemen, aviation is a force for good. Its pivotal role as an instrument of social and economic enrichment by connecting people and cultures needs to be safeguarded. The train for sustainability has left the station, and we have to embrace this challenge as much as it is an opportunity. But we must do so, as I say to my alliance, to do so collectively and to do so sustainably. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share these very short, brief remarks with you. Thank you very much.